everyone, and welcome to ABC Safety Roundtable. We have a guest speaker. Her name is Audrey, and she is with Fully Effective Employees. She is our EAP guru for today, and she's going to discuss areas for EAP for your program. We do have quite a full house, so I'm not going to go through introductions so that Audrey can get on with her program. However, I just want to let everybody know that this meeting or roundtable is being recorded, so that if you have any reason that you want to refer back to that, Tony will be sending out a link, or Janessa, once the program is completed. Excuse me. So on that note, I'm sorry, but I will have to be checking out early. I was double booked today, so I have another meeting to start at 1. I hope you guys enjoy this meeting. Audrey's program is about an hour long, so there will be plenty of time to ask questions afterwards. If you have any concerns or questions, shoot them in the chat box. Vanessa and or Tony will be watching them so that Audrey is aware of them. And I'm going to let Audrey take over.
Thank you very much, Dawn. As Dawn mentioned, my name is Audrey Rosenfeld, and I'm the president and owner and chief bottle washer of Fully Effective Employees. We're a local and regional EAP. Our office is located very next to ABC in Bellevue by Lake Bellevue. I've put my phone number and my email as well as our website here. So if anybody wants to ask me a question or give me a call offline, please feel free to do that. I noticed that we have kind of a range of attendees from occupational health to construction and also some business consultants. So my presentation today is going to be basically, generally speaking, as an EAP provider, as if you all are employers working with employees. And I'm going to give generic sort of examples with a bit of a slant on what we do at my EAP, because that's what I'm familiar with. So before we start, I'm going to give some objectives, and then I wanted to take a brief poll. So what we're going to talk about this morning is identifying what an EAP is, why employers should have an EAP, some specific ways that employers and employees can use an EAP. I'm going to give you a general overview of some of the problems and issues that we deal with. Talk about how COVID-19 is affecting workers and workplaces. Give you some examples about how you might be able to intervene with problem employees, and a few scenarios, the real life examples and scenarios of what we do and how we work at the EAP. I have one page of some crisis resources, and then after I'm done, I'd love to open it up for questions. So generally, I love doing interactive trainings and getting everybody to kind of contribute, but it's a little bit more difficult when we're doing this via Zoom. So again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them at the end. So if we could have the first poll, then Janessa. So if you could answer, do you have an employee assistance program? Yes, no, don't know. Great. Well, that sounds like we're a good percentage, about 50% of you do have an EAP. And if you don't know, we'll have to talk about how you can find out and the best way to get your EAP to promote for you. So thank you for that. So what is an employee assistance program? An employee assistance program is a work site-based program that was designed to help employees with personal and work-related problems. There's sometimes been a misconception that an EAP is only for employees. And it's always a challenge for us to make sure that employers get the message out that the program is also available at no cost for dependent family members. So a spouse, a significant other, an adult child, even an aging parent living in the person's home. And EAPs were started in the mid-70s. I believe the first EAP was started with the Kodak Film Company, and was really developed to be able to help executives and key employees deal with drug and alcohol problems. And then it grew and it developed as a way to help all employees with personal and work-related problems. And it also assists supervisors in dealing with difficult and challenging employees and performance problems and workplace issues. So just to tell you a little bit more about my company, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a certified employee assistance professional, and I have owned fully effective employees since 1997. We started actually in 1976. We were the first EAP in the state of Washington. And my company specializes in dealing with small to mid-sized businesses, and we have some large unions, and a number of our clients are in the construction industry, and many of them also do drug testing. So why would you want to have an EAP? We want to talk about when you're if you're one of those that doesn't have an EAP, or maybe you're looking at changing your EAP, you want to be able to determine what does an EAP provide, and can it meet the needs of my company? So there are a wide range of EAPs. So as I mentioned, the first one started as an internal company where the employee of the company, say Kodak, was paid by Kodak, and they were counselors that worked inside the company. And some very large companies, universities, and hospitals tend to still have internal EAPs. But now we're also having what we call external EAPs, which is what my company is. And what we do with that is we contract with a number of different companies, tailoring our services to meet the needs of that company, and we're not paid by an internal company. So employees feel that there's a level of confidentiality, that we're not going to be, the office isn't down the hall from the president of the company. A third type of EAP is a hybrid EAP, where it's a combination of an internal and external. So an example of that would be Washington State and King County and Boeing, where they have internal folks that are paid by the company that manage the program, and then they contract with large national EAPs to provide more service to the company. So the Employee Assistance Professionals Association, which is our governing licensing body, suggests that EAPs should have critical components. So when you're looking at an employee assistance program, you want to make sure that they have 24-hour crisis telephone access to professional counselors, that they're confidential, that they provide some sort of assessment and some sort of brief solution-focused counseling, not long-term therapy, but some brief counseling, and that they can do referrals to ongoing help or therapy, provide follow-up, and sometimes case management. And with my company, we often will manage people in their situation, maybe if they're in treatment, for up to 2 years. And that's really important, because if we referred somebody for treatment for, say, alcoholism, and they go to treatment and they come back to work, we want to make sure that their needs are being met and that they're still doing well. Another critical component is a critical incident stress management program, and I'm going to explain that in more detail. And that EAP providers have expertise in dealing with substance abuse, because we know that 10 to 15% of any given workforce is dealing with substance abuse issues. It might be themselves, a coworker, or a family member. So before I continue, I also wanted to take another poll. Janessa, if you put that out for me. Well, that's an interesting, a little bit of a trick question, isn't it? Because I think that people are really dealing with personal problems for sure. So almost half of you thought it was personal problems. And of course, issues related to COVID. I'd be interested to hear at the end what you thought those other problems might be. And my answer, of course, is going to be all of the above. And it's also interesting that no one thought that work or drug or alcohol might be issues in your workplace. So we can talk about that in a bit. So thank you. So why should you have an employee assistance program? And a lot of people will say, I'm really small. I only have 5 or 10 employees. I don't really need an EAP. And I would argue that as long as you have 1 employee, you probably need an EAP because people are always dealing with personal and work-related problems and stress, but also an EAP can significantly not only increase safety, and I'll give you lots of reasons why, but also it helps to increase your bottom line. It reduces turnover and absenteeism. It reduces health insurance costs, liability and litigation risks, workplace violence, and it increases morale and safety. And EAPs provide resources, referrals, and training to your employees. Sometimes employees are really stressed and busy and they do not want to sit on the internet and try to find a therapist. Right now, we know with COVID that therapists have very long waiting lists. And one of our clients said they tried 36 people before they could find a therapist. And so we do a lot of that legwork for our clients to try to help them get help. And we provide training. So in pre-COVID days, we were doing brown bag trainings on things like balancing work and family, managing stress, alcohol and drug information. We provide most of these trainings for free to our clients. So we're providing education, resources, and referrals. It also helps an employer save a good employee without the employer having to get involved in the person's personal problems. So if you have somebody that's coming to you with a wealth of personal problems, you may find yourself getting way over involved in that. And then what happens if you have to terminate that person? Then they're going to say you're retaliating because you knew my personal problems. Or if you get really involved, maybe you're over your head and you don't know what to do or how to help that person. So it lets you do the job you're paid to do and allows us as the professionals to deal with that person. And you can save that employee before their personal problems become so bad or overwhelming that they end up having to quit or being terminated. And EAPs absolutely increase safety. And that's a really big piece to know, and especially because you all are part of the Safety Council. And I think having an EAP is a really nice thing to do for your employees. It's a way to get them help. And as you all know, employees are almost always your most expensive asset and your most important. So this is a really inexpensive way to get something for your employees. So I wanted to go over in a little bit more detail all of these ways that EAPs can help save you money. Because it's confidential and free, it helps people get the right kind of help before they end up getting so far deep into a problem that they're not able to turn things around. So if they know there's an EAP, they can call. And if the employer has the EAP, they can use that as a supervisory tool, which I'm going to walk you through and explain how we do that. It helps supervisors by teaching them how to recognize and address employee performance issues and to determine when a personal problem might be impacting someone's work performance. It increases their loyalty because they know that the employer cares. And as I've mentioned, it builds morale and support because it is always more cost effective to retain an employee who might be struggling and offer them help than it would be to have to recruit, rehire, and retrain new employees. EAPs reduce absenteeism and sick leave costs. At least 25% of employee healthcare costs are related to emotional or mental health, and I would be willing to bet that we're up to about 70% during COVID. And that will include things like stress, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. And EAPs really help reduce medical costs because employees know how to get the right help. For example, if an employee has a drug or alcohol problem and they hear about this spectacular treatment agency in Southern California on the beach with palm trees and you can get away from it all, and they may go there, and that may not be at all either a licensed agency, it may not be able to meet the kind of care they need, and they may have blown their lifetime maximum treatment benefit by going to that resource. And by working with us, we can determine what they really need in terms of treatment, and we can find them a much more cost-effective and usually more appropriate treatment resource. And the other, as I mentioned, is if people are going through their health insurance and running down a list of 35 counselors, trying to find someone that's available on evenings or on telehealth or works with kids, they may be going to the wrong counselor because they're desperate, and they might spend a lot of their insurance dollars seeing the wrong person. So the EAP can really help to reduce medical costs and absenteeism by getting them the right help earlier. And it gives employees access to easy and accessible services and support much earlier. Well, EAPs also reduce the risk of litigation. A big safety issue, as you all know, is workplace violence. And these statistics are about 5 years old. I've had a hard time getting something really current, but about 80,000 civil cases are filed annually with the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, with an average award of $100,000 in punitive damages and legal costs. So an EAP can help employees who feel that they're being harassed or bullied. We can help them interact, deal with it, know how to report it, and how to take action. And we can help employers and consult with supervisors on strategies for intervention before they have to seek legal action, which can cost an employer a lot of money. In addition, we do sexual harassment training, and we refer to attorneys and other professionals to do outside investigations and provide legal assistance in these situations. Workplace violence, again, 1,000 people are murdered in the workplace annually. Approximately 2 million are victims of violent incidents or threats in the workplace. And we think this is at least doubled because many of these incidents go unreported. So the EAP can help reduce the risk of violent situations by providing consultation to employers about the risk factors. So for example, if an employer calls me and says, you know, Sam has been making some threats and we don't know if he's just blowing smoke or if it's serious, we'll go through and really ask some specific probing questions about Sam and what's going on and help the employer determine whether there is a serious risk or an imminent risk, in which case they would need to call the police or a security firm, or whether they need to intervene and refer that individual to the EAP or maybe terminate. And if they have to terminate, we want to talk about how they can make the workplace safe. Do they need to do a restraining order? Do they need to secure the premises or call in a security firm to protect employees? These are things that we can help strategize with. And certainly if an employer has a workplace violence policy, we'll help them with that. And we always talk about things like not having weapons on the workplace or in a company vehicle so that we can make sure that we're minimizing and mitigating the risk. So there are 4 main ways that people can use the EAP program or how they use our program. The first is self-referrals. And I would say about 85% of the clients that we work with are self-referrals. That means somebody has a personal problem, they call our phone number, and whatever they talk about with us is completely confidential and voluntary unless they disclose that they are at risk of harming themselves or someone else. And then we have a legal obligation to ensure that person's safety. But again, we will only give the information that is necessary to ensure safety. We deal with a wide range of personal and work-related problems, things like stress, depression, anxiety, relationship issues, addictions, and that can be shopping addiction, gambling, gaming addiction, as well as drugs and alcohol, family problems, financial problems, legal, work, and more. And when we report back to our employer a year-end utilization report to our client company, we never disclose who the person is, and we give a very generic presenting and assessed problem. So there's no way of identifying, oh, I knew Sam, he had a problem with his wife. There would be no way of knowing that. We give very generic examples. And if an employer were to call and say, hey, Audrey, is Sam calling you? He's got problems with his wife. I would say, I'm very sorry, I cannot share that information. And I always tell companies and clients, we would not be in business since 1976 if we were violating people's confidentiality. So really important to know. The second way that we recommend using our program is an informal referral. And when we do our trainings with our managers and supervisors, when we have our new clients that come on board, we always explain in very much detail how we do this. So this is just a brief overview. An informal referral might be, for example, you know that John, who's a long-term employee, is going through a divorce. And John, you've got a small company and everybody kind of at work knows John's saga and everybody's been supportive, but they're getting a little tired of hearing about it. And John has asked for a lot of time off. He needs to go to court. He needs to make arrangements to pick up his kids so he can see them. He's worried about his finances, and you really are concerned about him. So as an employer, you might say to John, you know, here's the EAP's card. I really think you could benefit from talking to the EAP, and whatever you talk about is confidential. But John, we have some concerns, and if your performance doesn't improve, we may have to refer you to the EAP as a supervisory referral, and we may proceed with disciplinary action. So the EAP is a great way for you to get help, to talk about your problems, what's going on, and we won't know anything about what you discuss. And even in that situation, if the employer were to call and say, I gave John the card, I really hope he's called you, you know, what's going on? Again, we would say, I'm sorry, we can't share that information. But it's also a really good way for an employer to get someone help and to feel good about the fact that they offered them that help in case they still have to proceed with disciplinary action. And maybe John really didn't know where to turn, and this is a really good option for him. And the third way is a formal supervisor referral. And we have a pretty extensive training program that we do with our employers to walk them through the process on how to make a formal referral. In this situation, you might know that John has a personal problem, but let's say he started missing work and he's had a couple of customer mistakes and complaints. And so at this point now he has a performance issue. Now you are referring him for the performance issue, even if you know the personal problem. We recommend that you never terminate somebody because they have personal problems or because they refuse to get help or counseling. But you can terminate them if they have poor performance. So in some situations with a supervisory referral, it may be that someone's earned a termination and you want to issue them a last chance agreement where you're giving them an opportunity to get help, and you clearly specify you've earned a termination because you've had too many absentees or because you violated a company policy. We're going to give you the chance to earn your job back, but you must contact the EAP and follow through with their recommendations. And even in this situation, we will let you know if John contacted us and whether he's following our recommendations and working with us, but we will not share any personal information about him to you. And this is often a really great way to save an employee, because with a lot of individuals, they'll hold everything together as much as they can, and they might lose their home, their relationship, their best friend, but they don't want to lose their job. So the employer has some leverage by using the EAP to help save a good employee who has problems. And the fourth way that we use the EAP a lot is with drug testing. And I know that some of you drug test and some of you don't. We believe that drug testing is the number one reason is safety. It can absolutely save people's lives. It reduces liability, accidents, L&I claims, insurance claims, absenteeism, turnover, company theft, and much more. And drug testing will increase your morale and your productivity and your bottom line. So we have a lot of companies where, for example, if they drug test and an employee is a drug user, they know that that company tests, but the competitor across the road doesn't. The people that use drugs are going to tend to go to the company they know doesn't drug test. And so those companies tend to have higher liability accidents, L&I claims, and much higher turnover. And we've often had companies come back to us and say, we've got a major drug problem in our company, but we don't know what to do because if we start testing, we're going to lose everybody. And so what we always say is if you start drug testing from the beginning, or you implement a program and you give people an opportunity to get help over a period of time, that's going to be a lot better for your company in the end. So our EAP works a lot with employers that drug test. What we do is if an employee tests positive for drugs, we'll do an initial screening. We'll find out what the drug is. We'll look at their drug test and see if they told us they smoked pot at a party and they have a very high drug level in their system. We know that's not true. So we're going to find out if they've had legal or work issues or relationship problems as a result of their drug or alcohol use. And if we think they may have a substance abuse issue, we're going to send them to a state licensed treatment agency that will do a diagnostic assessment. When that recommendation comes back, we will then make a recommendation for treatment and refer that employee to treatment. We'll usually give them 3 treatment options that are covered under their insurance. At that point, they sign a last chance agreement with their employer. So that means that they agree that they will be subjected to random drug testing. And if they test positive again, chances are they'll lose their job because they've had a last chance agreement. And our role at the EAP is to support that employee. We don't terminate people. We don't make recommendations for termination. Our role is to make sure that person is doing well in treatment. We usually get monthly status reports, and then we provide ongoing case management after someone has completed treatment to ensure that they're doing what they should be. So sometimes people will go to a drug and alcohol treatment program, they'll graduate, they'll go back, and maybe their spouse or friends use, and then they'll relapse, and we want to be there to support them and monitor it, make sure they get back into compliance so they can stay clean and sober and keep their job. An EAP is also an employer assistance program. And that's why I said earlier, even if you have 2 employees, you can benefit from having an EAP because chances are you also don't have an HR department. So while we're not HR consultants, we do have a lot of information about how you can help employees, and we can also direct you to HR consultants. We do a lot of supervision, coaching, and training with supervisors. We help them recognize and identify performance problems, looking at things like absenteeism, tardiness, decreased productivity, and attitude, which is a very difficult issue for most employers to confront and deal with, but it is a performance issue. We help with drug and alcohol problems, as I mentioned, working a lot with positive drug tests. We encourage employers that if they do pre-employment drug testing, that they also do random and post-accident and reasonable suspicion drug testing, because if somebody can stay off drugs to get hired, they may then continue to use, which could still be a safety issue. As I mentioned before, we work a lot with potential workplace violence. We help employers confront and deal with depressed or suicidal employees. A big issue is conflict among coworkers, and employers are often at odds to know how to handle that, and it could lead to potential workplace violence. We help with organizational problems, things like change, layoffs, death of a coworker, change in management or organizational leadership, and sexual harassment and bullying. We also offer trainings and critical incident debriefings. So a critical incident debriefing is a really important component of any workplace, but particularly those in the construction industry or where there are a lot of safety sensitive positions. Now, this is a long definition, but a critical incident is defined as any event which has the potential to produce unusual or distressing emotional symptoms, such as an accident, injury, death, disaster, threat or act of violence, or any other traumatic event at the workplace. So what happens to a lot of people is they may have some chaos or conflict at home. They might be worried about COVID, but they know they can go to work and do their job, and it's pretty rote, they know what to expect. But what do you do if somebody dies at your workplace or there's a serious incident at work? It can really throw people, and then they don't feel safe going to work either. An EAP will provide a critical incident debriefing when appropriate. So that's after an OSHA investigation and once we have the ability to set it up and do it properly. So we always suggest that employers contact us before promising a debriefing to make sure that it's the right fit. And what we do in a debriefing is we meet with a group of people that witnessed a traumatic event or experienced it, and we provide education about signs and symptoms of a normal reaction to an abnormal event. So for example, things like flashbacks, crying, nightmares, fear of going back to that particular area at work, or being very angry at the boss or the environment that they feel is unsafe. And we always say it's kind of like getting back on a bike. We want you, if you fall off a bike, we want you to get back on. We want to help employees be able to go back to work and function okay. A lot of research shows that critical incident debriefing can be very helpful by increasing morale and loyalty because employees feel very supported by their employer that cares enough to provide them some help. Also, the EAP counselors, when they're doing this session, can help identify employees who might be struggling as a result of something they've witnessed. And the employees generally feel safer and are more productive when they've had a debriefing. This is not counseling. It is time limited. It's usually about 90 minutes. And we like to have a homogeneous group of people, meaning that those who witnessed the accident and those who might have been working with or friends with the person who might have been affected, because we don't want those who did not witness something to have be re-traumatized by something they didn't have to see, but now they're hearing about. So I wanted to give you an example. Years ago, we had a large warehouse where a forklift driver had been stacking pallets, really a high level of pallets in an aisle in a warehouse. And he did it incorrectly and they were off kilter. And so over time, they started shifting. And there was a group of about 6 or 7 employees that were walking down the aisle of the warehouse at the moment that the pallets shifted and fell over. And they fell onto 2 of those individuals. One died instantly and another was critically injured. So the 6 or 7 that witnessed that were very, very traumatized. And when we did the debriefing, we didn't want to mix that group with the people that were friends with the people that were affected, because we knew that would further traumatize them. So when we do the debriefing, we want to choose the groups of people that we meet with. We assure them that whatever they talk about is confidential and that this is a place to talk about what they saw, what they felt, what they're hearing, and what some of the symptoms are now, and then how to take care of themselves. So it's a very educational, supportive process. We encourage management and company owners to come in initially and tell them, we support you talking here. This is completely confidential. The information will not be shared back with us. And then to leave, because oftentimes people who are very traumatized, they don't want to share anything in front of their boss because they're afraid it could impact their work. So a critical incident debriefing is very valuable when done correctly and then when it's done appropriately for the particular issue that we're dealing with. Sometimes we get employers that will call us and say, you know, so-and-so has cancer and we want to talk about that person. And we'll have to process that and decide that's not really a critical incident. And we want to make sure that we're not talking about someone behind their back. So we might come in and do a grief group or talk about how we might support that individual. But again, everything is open for consultation. And that's why the EAP can be so helpful, because no 2 situations are the same. Some other key issues. I know I talked about drug testing. Drug and alcohol issues. When I asked in my poll, no one thought that drug and alcohol issues were an issue in their workplace. But according to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the construction industry has one of the highest rates of substance abuse and substance use disorders. And that's due to a couple of things. One is that because if people are having accidents and they're in pain, If they have a pretty serious injury, they may be prescribed OxyContin or narcotic drugs, and those drugs can be very helpful. They're really great with acute pain, but they should only be prescribed for short periods of time. So when people are on them longer than they should be, they may become addicted. And some individuals really do like the feeling they get on those medications and will abuse them. And unfortunately, they're harder to get now. It's harder to get a refill. So people who become addicted will often use heroin because, believe it or not, it's easier to get and cheaper. And we have a number of clients we work with that are using OxyContin and heroin every day on the job site because the withdrawal is so difficult. And so they'd rather be using that than go through withdrawal, but it obviously causes a big safety issue. The other is that alcohol is pretty predominant in the construction industry. It's kind of a work hard, play hard mentality, and going for beers after work, having barbecues with a lot of alcohol, having celebrations, going to Mariners games, and oftentimes it revolves around a lot of drinking. So sometimes it becomes normalized and harder to determine those that actually have a problem with alcohol. Depression. Men and women both experience depression, but their symptoms can be very different. And because the construction industry tends to still be male dominated, men who are depressed may appear angry or aggressive instead of sad or tearful. And therefore their families, friends, and even their doctors might not always recognize that anger or aggression is actually a symptom of depression. Men are much less likely than women to recognize that it's depression, to talk about it, or to seek treatment for it. And yet depression affects a large number of men. And depression is very treatable. So the earlier we can treat it with medication and counseling, the easier it's going to be for people to resolve their feelings of depression. And unfortunately, when depression deteriorates and becomes much worse, it puts people at risk for suicide. Construction workers are statistically at a higher rate for suicide than almost every other profession. And if many of you heard Cal Beyer speak about suicide, you know that the construction industry is working very hard to build a zero suicide industry. And by that, we're trying to get the word out that it is okay to talk about depression. It's okay to ask about suicide. Some of the warning signs or factors that lead to people being suicidal in the construction industry are, again, that chronic pain and addiction. Sometimes that tough guy male culture that doesn't want to talk about feelings, or that it might feel weak to be able to express how one feels. And some of the other warning signs are things like increased tardiness and absenteeism, decreased productivity, decreased self-confidence, being isolated from peers, maybe working alone or in an isolated job, seeing agitation and increased conflict among coworkers. A person might have increased feelings of being overwhelmed, might have less ability to problem solve, and may have near hits or accidents or injuries, or may just be withdrawing from others, not wanting to hang out with other people, just seem like they're always on edge or in a bad mood. And there's lots of resources available. There's a suicide prevention lifeline where you can either text or call. Every county, this is the King County crisis line, the number here, every county has a crisis line. And there's actually a behavioral health crisis unit where people can come in person, professionals will come in person and do a crisis response. I will say right now during COVID, it's very difficult. There's a long wait, but that's a possibility. So we always encourage people to reach out for help. And that I always say that when people are feeling suicidal, they're very ambivalent. Most people who are suicidal are very depressed and they want to end their emotional pain. And so they feel that sometimes the only way out is to harm themselves or kill themselves, to leave the pain, but not to leave the world. And so what we try to do is get to them and talk to them about it. So it's never going to have somebody take their life because you ask about suicide. Asking somebody about it is not going to make it happen. And by asking, you're letting someone know that you care, that you're concerned, and that you're okay talking about it. And so the EAP can help you, consult with you on how to approach the individual and what kind of help to get them. And that brings us to mental health in general. 1 in 5 Americans has a mental illness or substance use disorder, yet many of them are reluctant to seek help or simply don't know where to turn for help, which is again how your EAP can help you. Employers can create awareness programs, education, training, and support, and make it known that they care about their employees and they want them to seek help if they need it. I believe that if mental health was treated like physical health, we could reduce the stigma and allow people more access to mental health services before a mental illness becomes more severe. For example, if an employee were to break their leg and show up at your workplace in crutches, most people would open the door for that person. They might ask them how they're doing. They'll say, how did you do that? How'd you break your leg? What can you do? Do you need me to carry something? What do you need? It's very open. It's openly discussed. If somebody has the flu and they go home and they're off work for 3 or 4 days, they have some chicken soup and some Tylenol, they rest and they come back, people might say, oh, I hear you had the flu. How are you doing? It's pretty bad in my house. But if people have a mental illness, no one wants to ask about it. So if somebody was off for rehab for drug and alcohol treatment, or they went to a treatment facility for depression or some mental illness, people aren't going to ask because they feel like they don't want to pry. It's too personal. That's too much information. What if the person tells me more information I don't want to hear? Or what if they're suicidal? But if we can create an environment that says that your mental health is just as important as your physical health, we can treat these issues earlier and mental illness doesn't have to become such a big problem. Issues like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety are all treatable, especially when we intervene early, which tends to be my mantra about intervening early. So now I want to go over some case examples. These are all real life case examples that we've dealt with at our EAP. They're not necessarily the right or wrong answer or way to deal with it, but I just wanted to give you a general overview of how we might handle some of these. So the first is an employee comes to work with alcohol in his breath, but denies having an alcohol problem. So what do? We had 2 examples of this. The first is that it was a long-term employee who had come to work smelling like alcohol. His behavior had changed. He seemed kind of pale and weak and frail, and he sort of just seemed dizzy and just not himself. And he had alcohol in his breath, but they didn't think that he had an alcohol problem. And so they called the EAP and asked us what to do. And we said, well, we think you need to go and take him for a test. So they drove him to their testing site and they tested him. He didn't have alcohol in his system. But the employee did mention to the occupational health service that he wasn't feeling well and that he had been feeling really weak and tired and just not himself. So he asked if they could do some blood work, which was absolutely wonderful. And it came back that he was a diabetic and that he had very high blood sugar. And he could have died of a diabetic coma. That's how bad his blood sugar had been. And my understanding is that sometimes when people have diabetes and they have very high blood sugar, it comes across on their breath as if it's almost like alcohol or sweet wine. So in this situation, the employer thought this person could have had an alcohol problem, but by referring him to the EAP and getting him tested, they actually saved his life. And the employee was very grateful. So that's always an indication about how we never want to have employers diagnose or make assumptions or tell a person, I think you're alcoholic or I think you have a drinking problem. We wanted to stick with the facts. The facts are, we think you have alcohol in your breath. We'd like to get you tested. Another example was an employee who had a very unique job. He was the only person there who did the job. He'd been there for 40 years. And everybody at work assumed that he had an alcohol problem. He staggered, he slurred his words, but nobody wanted to confront him because they didn't want to lose him because he had this really great skill. So one day he came to work and he was staggering, slurring his words, and he definitely smelled like alcohol. So instead of calling the EAP, they sent him home. And therefore, they didn't know whether or not he had alcohol in his system or not. And the next day he came to work and he had a seizure. They called the medics and they sent him home. The third day he came back and he smelled like alcohol again. And that's when they called me. And I said, I think that your individual does have an alcohol problem. And I would suggest that you send him for a test. And the reason that I think he has an alcohol problem is that having a seizure is a result of going through alcohol withdrawal with late stage alcoholism. So sure enough, they did send him for an alcohol test, and he did have very high levels of alcohol in his system. They referred him as a mandatory referral to the EAP. We got him into treatment and he's doing really well, and they were able to save a long-term employee. Second example, an employee tells you he has a drug problem and has been driving a company vehicle. Well, using illegal drugs is a violation of most company policies, whether or not you have a drug or alcohol policy. And you now have information that somebody is probably impaired while they're driving a company vehicle. So what you want to do is have that person go and get a drug test. You either want to have someone escort him there or drive him there, or call an Uber and require that he show up within a certain period of time. You never want him driving his own vehicle, and you absolutely have to make sure that he's not driving your company vehicle until you have more information what's going on. We encouraged the employer to let the employee know that we really appreciated his honesty, that he was obviously reaching out for help, that we were going to help him and not be punitive, but that we also had to ensure safety for our company. We were able to get that individual into drug and alcohol treatment. He's been clean and sober for 6 months, and he's back driving the company vehicle. Example number 3, your receptionist was a great employee, but now she's making mistakes and crying at her desk. This was a real life example. We had a young woman who had moved from a small town in another state with her boyfriend to the Seattle area. She was a great receptionist, bubbly, cheerful, productive, happy, doing a great job. And right after her probation in month 4, she started making mistakes, started breaking down and crying at her desk, and was very irritable. And a couple of customers had complained that when they came to the desk, she was really inappropriate. So the employer contacted me, and we had him refer the receptionist to the EAP. And what we found about this lady was that month 3, everything was great. Month 4, the boyfriend broke up with her, went back to their hometown, and she was left covering the rent for both of them. She had no family and no friends. She was devastated, and she didn't want work to know because the only thing she had was her job. So of course, we never shared this information back with the employer, but we did get this employee support and counseling. We helped her get out of her lease so that she could afford her apartment, and she started doing a lot better. And all the information that we gave back to the employer was, she's working with us and you should expect an improvement in her performance. And sure enough, she did. Now, if they didn't have an EAP, they probably would have ended up terminating this woman. So a really great way to save an employee by making a supervisory referral. Case example 4, an employee tells you that a coworker has been talking about suicide. So we encourage employers to use the motto, if you see something or hear something, say something. And whether that's about suicide, harassment, violence, or drugs, it's important for people to come forward and talk. Now, the employee was nervous because they were worried that we would have to disclose who they were. And unfortunately, we did, because that was the only person that individual had told. We worked with the employee and told the employee that they would have felt awful if they had kept this a secret and the employee had in fact killed themselves. So we supported this employee, worked with them, supported them around coming forward and telling us. And then the employer referred the employee to the EAP who was suicidal, and we were able to get that person help. And ignoring it would have been the wrong thing to do. So this employee did get help. they went into treatment, and they were able to keep their job. And they were actually really grateful that the employee had told. And case example 5, 2 coworkers are not getting along, and one tells you he's afraid of the other and that he's made threats to beat him up if he crosses that employee. In this situation, what we did was we recommended that the employer refer both of us to the EAP, both of the employees to the EAP. We talked to each of them to get their stories and to find out what was going on. And we worked with the employer to determine if that threat was really serious. Did it warrant termination? Did it warrant a referral for a fitness for duty assessment or a forensic evaluation to determine how serious this threat would be? And what we found was this person was really not intending to hurt the coworker. They just really didn't get along. We made arrangements for them to work on different shifts in different locations. And the one that had made the threats was given a formal referral and a last chance agreement to the EAP. He got some counseling and his behavior dramatically improved. So those are all very different cases, but stuff that we deal with almost every day. Unfortunately, we can't get through a day without using the word COVID-19. Like you, like me, you're probably all sick of hearing this. We hear it on the news, we talk about it all the time. And certainly in your poll, you identified this as being a big issue for your employees. And I think it's going to continue to be one for a long time. COVID-19 brings up so many issues. Many of these you, of course, are aware of. I think one of the #1 issues is anxiety. It brings up a lot of not knowing and uncertainty. When people feel out of control, they feel anxious because they don't have the ability to control certain things. And COVID-19 is one of those things. There's a lot of not knowing if I'll get the virus, if a family member will my parents be able to get a vaccine? Will I? And when will this ever end? With that, we also have grief and loss. Not only grief of loved ones, people who may have passed from COVID, but people who have died and we haven't been able to attend their funerals or be with them during their last moments. So grief has not been processed in the normal way. We've also lost the old way of being, and I really can't stress enough how important this is to talk about, is the fact that we don't have that independence and freedom to be able to go out without a mask, to have friends over, to go to happy hour, to have dinner or go to a movie. All of these things have changed and we've lost that old way of being, and we've lost celebrations, Christmas holidays and get-togethers, weddings, funerals, birthday celebrations, graduations. And isolation and loneliness is a really big deal, and I think something that we underestimate. I work with a number of clients who may be going to a workplace, but they come home to an empty house and they can't visit with family or friends, and they're staring at the 4 walls a lot. And others who are working from home, maybe they have kids and everybody's at home and they're actually working and living in their bedrooms, or they may have a studio apartment and they see those 4 walls all the time and they feel very lonely and they're really becoming depressed. Obviously, we all have mask and social distance fatigue. And there's parenting issues. Whether you're a parent or you know or work with someone who's a parent, the struggles are so huge. Trying to work at home with children at home, hoping that kids are learning when maybe online learning doesn't work for them, coping with school closures. Are we in? Are we out? Are they going? Are they not? How do you help your kids? Maybe you're not good at school and you don't understand the technology. How do you help them learn? And we have this whole other issue of socialization. How are kids socializing? How are they learning how to play sports, team sports, and how to get along or have even physical connections with other kids? We also know at EAP that there's a tremendous increase in domestic violence, child abuse, alcohol and drug abuse, relationship and family problems, which is why it's so hard to find counselors. And of course, financial issues. We may be lucky that we have our jobs, but maybe the family member doesn't, or maybe employees are still being laid off. So that uncertainty about lack of work, layoffs, and the ability to pay the bills is absolutely an issue. So how do you intervene with employees, whether it's COVID issues or performance issues? We encourage you to ask an employee if there's anything that they want to talk about or need help with. If you see changes in their behavior, maybe it's their physical appearance, or maybe they look like they haven't showered in a long time or changed their clothes, or they look disheveled, or maybe they look like they're under the influence or very depressed. If you have concerns, take them into a private area, talk with them about your concerns and your observations and the changes in behavior. And if you have an EAP, refer them to the EAP. Always deal with inappropriate behavior or performance issues early and be sure to document. I always tell our supervisors that you may never need your documentation, but it's always a good idea to take notes. For example, John, the one that's going through the divorce, write down every morning that he comes in late. Are they always Mondays? Is he always taking a long lunch or asking for Fridays off? Or Sue, is she always having a bad attitude every 3 months or so? What specifically did she say? And who is she having those issues with? That way, if you do have a performance issue and you want to confront your employee, you don't want to have to try to remember, was it Sue or Kathy I had the issue with? You want to have your documentation so you can use it to be able to address it. And then it's not arbitrary, it's fact. And you're talking about facts with the individual. And if you never need it because the issue never happens again, you don't have to worry about it. As I've mentioned over and over, don't be afraid to talk about suicide. If someone's making a veiled threat or you hear about it from coworkers, contact your EAP and see if you can get some help and direction on how to make referrals or help that person. Deal immediately with potential threats of violence and be sure you have a policy. I once had a situation where someone was making violent threats and the supervisor was so afraid of the employee, they never dealt with it and never documented it. And the next supervisor that began to supervise that person wanted to meet with the person and said, you've been making threats and this isn't acceptable. And the employee said, I've been working with Joe for 20 years and he never had a problem with it. So don't make someone else's problem. We need to deal with it and prevent anything from happening that could endanger your employees' lives. Always remove someone from the job if you suspect that they have a substance use or impairment, and never let them drive home or use a company vehicle and try to test them. Again, we never want to diagnose someone or make assumptions. We're just trying to get that person help and keep your company safe. And if you have an EAP, you want to consult with them about any of these issues for consultation and support. I just wanted to leave you with a few tips because I know that kind of the talk about COVID was pretty negative. So, and this is tips that I think we can all use. It's sort of become my mantra around coping with anxiety and stress, is that we need to try to think about focusing on the things that we can control and let go of the things that we can't. So we can't control what others do, say, or feel, or the choices that they make. And we often try, but we can't. And you can't control things that happened in the past or any event beyond your control, such as when you'll get a vaccine or when the virus will end. But we can control our attitude and our mindset, our words and actions, how we treat others, and most importantly, during these difficult times, how we can take care of ourselves. So using good self-care techniques like getting rest, exercise, eating well, having Zoom calls with people in our lives, taking up new hobbies, trying to stay as emotionally well as we can, and trying to stop our automatic negative thoughts. So when we feel anxious, we often use these ants because we sometimes think that if we can catastrophize or prepare for the worst, somehow we'll be able to handle it. And I like to tell people that, that is often a lot of wasted time and energy because we may not be able to control that outcome. All we know is what we can handle and control right now, and to try to rephrase how we think about things. So, for example, if we think of our life as a disaster or everything is a nightmare and falling apart, you can see how that could easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if we reframe things and think about things as a challenge, or I'm working really hard, or I'm trying to stay positive, sometimes that can be helpful. Some people like to express gratitude for one new thing each day. And it might be something as simple as it's not raining today or it's Friday, but really trying to focus on the positive and developing these stress busting thoughts to reassure ourselves that we will get through this and to try to give ourselves positive reinforcement. Now here I have a list which we can distribute of if you don't have an EAP, or even if you do and you want to have some crisis lines available to you. We have the National Suicide Prevention Line, the SAMHSA that is also for mental health and addictions, a crisis line that you can also text for confidential support. The Trevor Project is a great program for LGBTQ youth, and the Veterans Crisis Line. So those are our resources, and I know I speak real quickly, so I'm actually done, and I'd like to open it up and see if anybody has any questions.
Well, I'll start with a question for you. So, you know, say you do have an employee who is wanting to seek some counseling. You know, say he's got some marital problems, calls you up to get the referrals to an actual family therapist. What's the process when trying to find one? Is it you're looking 2-3 weeks out before you can even get the appointment? You know?
Well, that's an excellent question, Tony, because you're right. I would say it might even be longer than that. I literally think my counselor the other day said they called literally 36 people trying to get an appointment. The beauty of our program is that right now during COVID, we're actually doing telemental health. So we have a secure HIPAA compliant platform. So what we would do is we do an intake assessment, figure out what they need, what kind of counselor they want, what their insurance is. And we'd go ahead and call and try to find some folks that are available. We get the employee that information and tell them, you know, there's these ones here may have an opening in 3 weeks or 3 months, whatever it is. But we could also still arrange to do some short-term telemental health. So we can do it like Zoom, but it's secure and HIPAA compliant to just sort of get them stabilized. So it's a really great in-between or sort of bridge to getting that help.
So for those of us who may or may not have an EAP, what kind of things should we be looking at when determining a best fit for our respective company?
Well, again, I think it depends on, you know, whether you want, most of you are going to want an external program, and you're going to want to find out what do you want to provide. So our program has a legal and financial option where they can get free legal help or assistance. And there's a huge do-it-yourself website where they can do forms and download information and help with identity theft. There's an online work-life program where they can get help with resources for childcare or elder care anywhere in the country. There's some health risk assessments and articles and information and all kinds of webinars. So they could add that as an optional program or not. They could have kind of a telephonic program that would be sort of a basic program. They could have a 3-session model where they have sessions that they can provide. So it's really determining what would be the best fit for them and what they need. So for some really large national companies, they may want to deal with a really large EAP that has locations in other sites. And if they're a small or regional company, they might do well with a company like ours, where we know how to say Puyallup and Enumclaw, where sometimes these national ones have no idea and they think that, you know, we're right around the corner from each other. But good question.
So I know a lot of times as well that people will say, you know, if you don't know if you have an EAP, a lot of times they'll say, well, call your insurance provider and in order to find out. Is that necessarily something that is necessarily true. I know that my wife working for Boeing, they have all sorts of EAP programs, but if I'm just running my own company and say I subscribe to Blue Cross, I mean, is that sometimes just buried in the contract of services that are being provided, and how do I find that information?
Awesome question, because I forgot to mention that. Thank you. So yes and no. There are some EAPs that are embedded in the health insurance. So if you have a certain EAP program, you'll be given what they call a free EAP, which means that you might get a sort of an EAP as part of your health insurance. But calling your health insurance is usually not the way to go, because they won't know. They're often standalone programs, like mine is a standalone. And so your insurance, you might have 3 different policies. You might have Blue Cross, Aetna, and Kaiser, and they're not going to know who your EAP is. Your broker might, but then again, they may not either if you have a broker. And I think that's one of the other things that I say in terms of looking for the best fit for you, is that sometimes you do get what you pay for, and sometimes free is not always the best. So an embedded EAP program, well, it may not cost you anything. They're not really incentivized to get people to use the program because it costs them money. And they may be kind of a bare bones product or a very large product. And so they're not going to know the key players in your company or who's your safety manager or your company owner. Smaller companies like mine, we really get to know our employers and who the key players are. And we also believe that my staff get paid on the number of employees per year. So if a company has 25 employees, we get paid for those 25 employees, and it doesn't matter how many people use the program or how many don't. So again, that's something that you want to be looking at when you're trying to strategize what's most important for us. Do we want to know who they are or not?
Okay. Now, what about, I know a lot of times we have some contractors have very diverse workforces. What about for workforces that, say, a significant portion of your laborers are non-English speaking? I mean,
So we use yes, good question. So we use a language line, so they can do the first line of interpretation for us. So if we can't figure out what the person's trying to say or how they want to communicate, they may opt to have a family member or friend actually work with them on the phone with us, or we do have a language line. I think they've got 60 different languages, and so we can use them to kind of get the basic information. And then if somebody needs to be referred to an agency or a treatment program, we will do our very best to try to find them something that helps them in their native language. And that's an ongoing issue for sure in our work environment. And we're also very conscious of diversity. We do some diversity training, and also being aware that some people culturally don't believe in or want to accept counseling as something they discuss. So there's a lot of reticence to seeking help if they're from a different culture. I also wanted to mention, Tony, in terms of that question about not knowing if you have an EAP, sometimes it's a little bit frustrating from my perspective, is that I will send information. We send monthly and quarterly newsletters by electronic, and we like that our employers will send that out to their employees and educate them about the EAP program. So the more that the employer can do to send out wallet cards, brochures, posters, monthly mailings, anything they can do to disseminate that information to employees, the better, because the more employees know about it, the more it's going to be used, and the more employers promote it and make it important, then people will use it. But I've had situations with some of my clients where I'm sending the information to the wrong person, and that person isn't distributing it to everybody, and then they don't know that they have an EAP. So, but we do want to make sure that employers make sure employees know who their EAP is and how to use it.
Oh, speaking to that, so when people sign up for an EAP program, is there informational packets that are available to be distributed to company employees and kind of have a toolbox talk about, or that a staff meeting that can be discussed and information can be shared?
Yes, I believe every EAP does that. What we do is we have a wallet card and we have a brochure that we send out. So if a company signs up 30 employees, I will mail them a hard copy wallet card and brochure. I email them a company introductory letter that they can put on letterhead that says, we want to make you aware of our new EAP program. We give every one of our clients a login and password that's unique to them on our website. So there's a wealth of information on our website and we explain how to use that. And then we have a training for employees, a little webinar training for employees that they can log into, and one for supervisors in terms of how to supervise employees so that they're all aware of that. In non-COVID days, when we have larger companies, we go out on site and do that. We also, for our larger clients, we'll do brown bag training so that we're always getting in front of the employees, how to balance work and family, how to met budgeting basics, how to cope with stress, so that the more those things are offered, the more they're going to be used. So we do provide those materials, and we have rotating posters. So we'll send different posters at different times of the year so they can be put up in break rooms.
Well, I know there's one question that's probably burning in everybody back of their mind. You know, to speak to the financial side of things, you know, what kind of costs is an employer looking at when setting up an EAP program? I mean, is it just kind of, you know, here's an overall price and, you know, you have unlimited employee use, or do you break it down by a number of employees? How's the pricing structure work?
That's a really good question. It's very affordable. So I'm going to give something very generic because it really will be client dependent based on the number of employees and the type of program they have. But it can be, if it's a really small company, we usually charge a flat rate of $500. And otherwise it's a little bit under $2 an employee per year. So if you think about what it costs you, per month. So if you think about what it costs you, say $25, $23 an employee per year. And if you have 10 employees or 20 employees, think about what it would cost you just to save one good employee, or to have to terminate somebody and then have to go through the recruitment process. So generally speaking, and my numbers were a little off, but generally speaking, under 30 employees, it's a flat rate of $500. And over that, it's usually around $2 an employee per year. Per month, per month. Long morning. And really, you know, when you think about what does it cost to take everybody to a Mariners game, or what does it cost to have a barbecue or a potluck lunch, this is a big investment in your employees. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm actually going to chime in to say thank you, Audrey. Your slideshow was awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time out to present your EAP program. Tony, you asked some great questions, so I hope that everybody that is listening retained and obtained all the information they were looking for to either start their own EAP program or learn more about it. Unfortunately, I need to check off. So Tony, I will be looking, excuse me, into those slides just to have on hand. CTech Electric does have their own EAP program that is within our medical program. So I know a couple of our employees have already taken advantage of it and have had really good results out of it. So again, thank you, ABC members, for taking the time out of your day to listen to Audrey. And I'm going to let you guys go, but please feel free to continue your communications and questions. And I will see everybody at our next meeting, hopefully in person. If not, of course, we'll be available by Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you all. Feel free to email me if anybody has questions offline.
Thank you, Audrey.
Bye-bye.